So up here with me, we have a few representatives of that group just to kind of summarize and give their thoughts and their reflections on what was kind of discussed. So even though we only had 2 hours, we actually covered quite a range of topics. So I kind of wanted to list off some of the things we addressed over those 2 sessions. First was, some of these ideas about what infrastructure we need and what types of infrastructure we really want to start targeting and looking at. And that includes everything from how to build personal profiles, how do we advance personalization technology, all the way to things like how do we develop Section 508 specifically for cognitive disability and building technologies that really address cognitive disability rather than kind of wrapping it up in this bundle with all other physical and sensory disabilities. One of the really interesting topics that came up was the idea of culture and how we need to reflect on and address culture in some of these problems. So that actually looked at everything from the idea that accessibility research and accessibility technology is simply not cool enough, right? But then on the flip side, we also had this idea that millennials actually have a really strong sense of social responsibility and really want to partake in these types of issues. So, we kind of talked about that and kind of looked at the flip side to both of those issues. And then we also talked about things from, how do we look at employment and how do we really look at these technologies to affect employment and what employment's role is currently. Everything from how people are hired, how staff is looked at from a disability perspective, and what kinds of technologies corporations use internally to support their staff. We also talked about the role of different standards, everything from web standards to technology standards to possible future standards, whether they'd be a good thing, a bad thing, and then what their place would really be in the world. And kind of last but not least, various approaches to achieve success and what that would look like. So up here with me today, we have a kind of equally representative group. So to my left is Clayton Lewis, who's a professor in computer science for the University of Colorado at Boulder. On the far right of the left table over there, Frances West, who is the Chief Accessibility Officer for IBM. To her left, John Rockford, who is an instructor at the University of Massachusetts Medical School. And to his left, Bill Coleman, as you know, kind of keystone to the Coleman Institute, as well as a participant in Alsop Lewis, a venture capitalist firm in Silicon Valley. So I think today I'll kind of just open it to the group and then everyone can kind of chime in as they feel necessary. But my first question to everyone up here, to all the panelists, is what outcomes do we actually see from this partnership and from the discussion that we had? So Clayton, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so why are we doing this? I was struck by many things that David Braddock said this morning, but one in particular comes to mind here. So in talking about right of access to information, David said, in effect, why would we want to live in a world where people didn't have access? And so that's what this is about for me. What kind of world do we want to live in? And then coupled with that, now's the time where we have an opportunity really to shape what kind of world we're going to be in. The technologies we're talking about are maturing in ways that offer pretty exciting opportunities in terms of wide access and participation by people. So that's what I'm looking for, is that kind of world in which everybody has a chance to participate fully.
I'm Frances West. So because we're a technology company and also we're probably one of the very few companies that still has research organization as part of our corporate kind of organization, I came into this role of representing and also managing IBM's own accessibility portfolio from a technology standpoint, thinking that there will be many like-minded industry organizations or companies out there. But then to my surprise, there aren't that many companies doing research or innovation. And based on our own experience supporting our 350,000 plus employees around the world, that this area actually requires very nuanced and very advanced technology research So this has been my personal kind of mission to really find an avenue to work with government and also academia to really put the technology innovation research as top of mind. And the reason in this case we need the government as an equal partner is because this whole area actually started out with a policy decision on ADA. So it's a very unique opportunity. And so when Clayton sent me the invitation, I thought this is actually one of the very few opportunities that I have seen that really took the technology innovation topic as top of mind topic. So I'm hoping that with this engagement that we can really move this up, not just up a few notch like earlier. We need to move it up a lot because this needs to be a quantum leap. Thank you.
All right, and John?
Hi, I'm John Rochford. I've been spending my professional career serving people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in particular. But I've also been an accessibility professional, developing web applications and online learning courses and all kinds of things that are accessible to people with physical disabilities. And in the international accessibility world, there's a lot of effort internationally to make information and communications technology, including the web, accessible to people with physical disabilities. And there's been very little effort and very little research into including people with cognitive disabilities, even though people with cognitive disabilities by far outnumber all physical disabilities combined. And they can't be left out. This huge swath of our population, they can't be left out of this revolution that we're living. That's it.
And Bill?
Okay, why are we doing this? And this is about public-private partnership. Well, we've had a dream in the Coleman Institute, I think shared by all of you, that the convergence of computing and technology was going to lead to the ability for systems, distributed systems, to support us in all aspects of our lives. And with mobile computing and the cloud, my view is that it could become a prosthesis for life if the systems could interact with people, especially with cognitive disabilities, in light of those disabilities and their abilities as well. The things we do today with assistive technology, computer-assistive technology, it's all good stuff. You saw some of it today, but it's mostly one-off single applications. And it's not applications that can build on one another and get more capability because another application is there. The kind of things we're used to on the web and with our mobile devices. So what can technology do? Well, we're at the point now where IBM's a leader in this, but many organizations have created initiatives. The National Institute of NIST, the National Institute of Standards, is leading a number of activities here. We need to make it such that we don't have to make the applications adaptable or adjustable or whatever for people with disabilities, abilities, anything else. So I'll use a quick analogy, and that's the network itself. How many of you know what the names of the 7 layers of the OSI stack are? Well, good. Then you don't have to care about the network. You inherit all that stuff. You don't have to worry about routing and switching and packets, and it's all there. It's very complex stuff. Well, in computer science, these things are called layers of abstraction, that at the lowest layer, it knows about the physical network. And above that, it knows about how to connect the things on the physical network. But you don't have to know about any of those things. Those are layers of abstraction. Well, we're to the point where we can actually create technology that does that for what we're talking about, for people with disabilities and abilities. So if we build into the browsers and the mobile operating systems and even the desktop operating systems, conceptually something that is fairly simple. There's a lower level which would know about you. Think about it, if the lowest level of the network is the physical network. Well, the lowest level of this is you, right? So that could learn about you, develop a personal profile of what your abilities and disabilities are. And with the technology of things like machine learning, it will get better all the time. And then on top of that, if we build an open set of technologies that are the next layer that are embedded in the operating system, that are really libraries, and these are libraries that based on what you're doing right now and your physical or cognitive disability, here is the best way I have learned to interact with you. So those will grow and get stronger and stronger over time as we learn and the system gets stronger and knows you better. And then right above that is all this human interface stuff. We have technologies, you've heard of HTTP, but I mean HTML is the way you mark up and present things on the screen. Well, if those then, if those libraries actually are called by the interface that's interacting with you, it will change the whole way it looks, feels, sounds, whatever, appropriately. Now, when that happens, we don't have to train application people anymore. People who build applications and services, they just build the application service and they just inherit these things. And it'll adapt to you anywhere in context of what you're doing. And so that's why we want to do this. Industry's not going to do it by itself. There's too many other priorities. This involves standards that are only good if everybody's using it. But industry's only going to do it as well is if it's really for them. Well, this is what I just described will change the world for people with cognitive disabilities. But it'll change the world for everybody in every aspect of what you're doing and where you are. As Frances said earlier, when she lands in France, she's cognitively disabled. She can't speak the language. She doesn't know where she's going. The system will take care of that. Anyway, that's what this is all about. We have to create that, and the government has to be part of it to be the convener, and the industry will jump on it. It'll take several years to get there, but we can build those standards, and then they should be part of the open source community, something like what's called the Apache Foundation. So now everybody can use that. It'll be built into all the systems, and we'll be able to actually leverage this.
All right, great, thank you. And I'll say we'll do another round of questions up here, but we'd love to hear questions and comments from everyone in the audience as well. So if you have a question or a comment, please raise your hand, and then we'll get a microphone to you, and then we'll kind of go through those once we kind of go through this round. So for the second portion, so we kind of heard what outcomes we're looking for. We kind of heard a small slice of what the future looks like. My second question is, how do we do this? How do we achieve that? So I'll start off with Clayton again.
So I may steal some of Frances's thunder because one of the things I got from the discussion was a point that Frances made. I think Jeff alluded to it in his summary, and it relates to what Bill was just saying. We need to harness the enormous energy of our very innovative worldwide technology culture. So how are we going to do that? We've tried doing it by sort of taking a compliance view. You have to do this, and Frances eloquently made the point that we've got to get away from that, and we've got to make this a positive appeal. So we've got to get people to recognize that this is an important space for innovation and creativity. So I think all of us working in the space know that ourselves as insiders. We know how much creativity is involved, how many exciting new ideas are out there. I'll just mention one example that my students and colleagues and I are working on, how to make educational simulations in physics accessible for people who can't see, because this is a case where there are various kinds of diagrams and animations and so on that are traditionally used there. Well, it's an enormously challenging and exciting problem to think about, well, how do you convey the structure of a magnetic field without using pictures? How can you do it with using tactile displays and auditory displays? This is very creative work. So Francis is pointing out to us, that's one of the things we've got to do, is to emphasize how creative and exciting this work is, so that people will be drawn to it for that reason, not as something that they feel is somehow an obligation to be involved in, but as something that they really see as a creative opportunity.
Great, thank you. Francis?
I have nothing to say since
Everybody's quoting you.
I think this this whole area. When I took over this responsibility, at that time, I've been with IBM. I'm a career IBMer in the sense that I've over 30 years with IBM. But up to this job, I've always changed job every 3 years. So, and I thought coming into this job, 3 years, I will have this thing, wrapped up, and then I can move on. And then I realized that what we're dealing with is not just technology. It's not just, it's not just advocacy. We're dealing with the cultural and attitudinal issues. And then I realized that, so you have to be patient, I guess. And as we are patiently waiting to organize ourselves, the market force actually is with us, because in this 10-year period, for the baby boomer, the baby boomer initiative, the 76 million baby boomer topic 10 years ago was just, lightly referenced. Now it's everywhere. And 10 years later, when 10 years ago, it was just the beginning with the Web 2.0. Remember that? And now we have cloud computing, so everybody can relate everywhere, every place. I want it my way. And Apple certainly made this iPhone, everything, which is really the beginning of the personalization, right? So when you start talking about personalization, I always say accessibility is extreme personalization. You're taking technology, instead of you adapt to the technology has the ability to adapt to you. So timing-wise, by being patient, I guess, the market force is with us. So now we really have to kind of jump on it. But jumping on it cannot just be a legislative action alone. I totally agree the American Disability Act is one of those transformative, societal transformational policy decisions. But now we have to think about the positive incentives to bring the policymaker, bring the business together. And then it has to be 360-degree involvement. Earlier we were talking to Claudia that this has to be a bottom-up, top-down, and sideways initiative. In IBM, we have this, some of you probably seen our commercial, the Smarter Planet, right? And there were some key words. It says, we need to be instrumented, interconnected, integrated. Basically, what it says is that you cannot deal with an issue, especially like a disability or cognitive disability issue, as a one incident and a one-off at one time. You got to think about it in totality. So, in other words, if you care about employment, which we all know is the ultimate objective, it's not just about the employment. It's not just about at work, whether you have the right accommodation. It's how the person go to work, and how do the person get up to get ready for work. So I think the technology and also the expectations come to a point where we need to think the whole thing in a very, kind of ecosystem and holistic way, and which says it's a big problem, a big challenge, but also big opportunities. And we are in this for the long haul, but we do need the government and also academia actually coming in and creating the excitement, which that's what's lacking. Because right now it's all associated with the negative. If you don't do this, we're going to punish you. So I'm looking forward to, hopefully through this kind of forum, to change the dialogue, to change the perspective, to change frankly, the perception that has been associated with, technology initiative with a disability.
Great, thank you. John?
So it's apparent to me that my colleagues up here are strategic thinkers. I am a tactics guy. And one point I want to make is that I totally buy into the vision that Bill outlined earlier, and I'm a member of the Cognitive and Learning Disabilities Accessibility Task Force for the World Wide Web Consortium, and we're working to develop standards. And they all sound good. What the whole vision that Bill laid out sounds good, and that the problem one problem that I see that I just like to make a strong point about is that user testing is what's going to prove whether these techniques work or not. And there's been almost none of that. So when Francis earlier was talking about a top-down, bottom-up, I totally buy into that too. There also has to be a bottom-up approach. So user testing, I just want to say that. And then as far as how do we get developers interested in accessibility, and I was doing some brainstorming earlier, and I'm very interested in how to make that cool. That was a term that you first used. For the past 5 years in Boston and around the country, we've been holding unconferences, we call them, and we've been trying to attract developers to teach them about accessibility. And yes, we do get some developers that come. Most of the people that have come, though, already have bought into accessibility and want to learn more about it. We're not getting a lot of developers who don't know anything about it and want to learn about it. And so I think that we can do things that might be carrots for them. One, for technical people, challenge is a great incentive. And if we can pitch that accessibility is a challenge to solve that they could be a big part of it, and I think that's one way. For instance, Google has a bounty program where it offers monetary rewards to developers to help identify bugs and security problems. Maybe there's some kind of opportunity there for accessibility. And I'm just spitballing here, but my point is that we need to develop a culture within the development community that accessibility is cool, it's attainable, and it's a challenge to be solved. That's it.
Great, thanks. And Bill?
So how do we get this done? Well, it's certainly not going to be easy. Shay this morning went over the 4 steps that we were trying to launch to make the declaration move forward. The first one was, of course, this ground roots movement to get state legislatures to adopt the resolution like Colorado did. We're not asking for laws or money. We just want adoption. We'd like to get a groundswell from that. And we'd like to build on that to the point that we can take it to the federal level. When we take it to the federal level, we do want legislation. And the legislation we want is it needs to include something about affordability and those kind of rights, but it also needs to be about the technology. And for the technology, we have a standard in the Rehabilitation Act called 508 that was enacted in 2001, and but it's mostly for blind and hearing impaired physical. It's not really for cognitive. We need a new version of that at some point. And if we could have ready at that time a set of things that can be adopted as part of that standard, we've got a big chance to move it forward. So that brings me to step 2. But before I leave that, the reason that 508 was actually adopted by the industry was the government said, we're not buying anything that wasn't 508. Well, that's a little bit of a hammer, but it worked. Everybody did it. It wasn't that difficult. In this case, for the technology, we need the industry to lead, and we need the industry to believe and understand, because it's not just a belief, that this is really for their benefit. This is going to give them not only a bigger market, a richer market, more and more powerful kinds of applications will be able to be built and used. That'll increase their market share. You've heard the concept of the Internet of Things. Everything in the world is going to be attached to the Internet, and therefore you'll be able to interact with that. Well, that means it's going to have to understand more about you. This kind of architecture will do that too. So what we have to do on the other side, though, is bring that public-private partnership together and bring a dialogue. And the best way to do that is to do it under the one that this is not just about cognitive disabilities. This is about the much bigger accessibility for everyone. This is crossing the digital divide. It really is. And we don't want to do it as a hammer. We want to do it where we can, the federal government can be the convener, and at best if it comes out of the White House. We've had several things like the cybersecurity areas that do that. And if we can get them to convene, we can get the right people at the table. We can get the CEO or someone reporting to the CEO from the IBMs and the Microsofts and the Apples and the Googles to come in, and they can put their heads together and say, yes, we have to do this. And then we can start moving this forward. It won't happen overnight. It'll take a few years, but I think that this can be done. And this decade is the decade, because this whole cloud, Internet of Things, mobile revolution is really coming together. And by the end of this decade, if it's not built in, we're going to be trying to layer it on, and it will be awkward and hard and more difficult, and it won't be pervasive across all applications.